For 6 years, Marcus Johnson had the same nightmare every night, the death of the man he was supposed to protect. Until the night he realized his passenger was the dead man's son. But let's go back to the beginning. In Marcus Johnson's taxi sat an old newspaper clipping in the glove compartment. Security guard fails to prevent executive's murder. David Chen shot outside office building. Marcus kept it there as a daily reminder of the worst day of his life, 6 years ago, when he had failed at the one job that mattered most. At 48 years old, Marcus had tired brown eyes that carried the weight of guilt, and graying hair that had turned silver faster than it should have. He drove a yellow cab for Metro Taxi Company in downtown Chicago, working the night shift because the darkness somehow felt appropriate for someone who had failed when it mattered most. His cab was clean but worn, and he kept it that way. No decorations, no personal touches, just a vehicle for getting from one fare to the next. Every night at 7 p.m., Marcus would start his shift with the same routine: check the newspaper clipping, say a quiet prayer for David Chen's family, and begin driving through the city he knew by heart. He'd been driving taxi for 6 years, ever since his security license was revoked and his reputation destroyed. It wasn't much of a living, but it was honest work. And after what he'd done, honest work was all he deserved. The other taxi drivers at Metro knew Marcus as the quiet guy, who never complained about bad fares, who always worked the late shifts, and who somehow always seemed to be carrying some invisible burden. What they didn't know was that Marcus drove taxi not because he loved it, but because it was penance. Metro Taxi Company was a small outfit where most drivers were either starting out or, like Marcus, had nowhere else to go. Marcus worked alongside drivers from all walks of life: Ahmed, an immigrant sending money home to Somalia; Rosa, a single mother working 2 jobs; Tony, a retiree who drove for something to do; and Jake, a young guy trying to pay for college. They all saw Marcus as reliable but distant. He'd help other drivers when they had car trouble, cover shifts when someone was sick, and never caused any drama in the break room. But he never talked about his past, never joined them for drinks after work, and never seemed to take any real joy in anything. "You ever wonder what Marcus did before this?" Rosa had asked Ahmed once. "He talks like someone who's used to being in charge, but he acts like he's hiding from something." Ahmed had nodded. Some people carry heavy things. Best to let them carry it the way they need to. The regular passengers who rode with Marcus appreciated his quiet professionalism. He knew the city perfectly, never tried to pad the fare with longer routes, and had a calming presence that made late-night rides feel safer. Mrs. Williams, who worked at the hospital and often needed rides home after her shifts, always requested Marcus when she could. "He's got kind eyes," she'd tell the dispatcher, "sad but kind." Marcus had been more than just a security guard 6 years ago. He'd been the head of personal protection for Chen Industries, responsible for the safety of CEO David Chen and his family. It had been a prestigious position with a 6-figure salary, and Marcus had been good at it. Until the night he wasn't. David Chen had been receiving death threats for weeks before his murder. Marcus had assessed the threats, developed security protocols, and assigned protection details. Everything had been planned perfectly, except for one detail. Marcus had assumed the threat would come during business hours at the office when security was highest. Instead, the killer had waited until 7:30 p.m. on a Tuesday when David was leaving late from a board meeting. Marcus had been in the building, coordinating with building security, when he should have been escorting David to his car. The attack had happened in the parking garage, a location Marcus had secured earlier but hadn't thought to check again. David Chen had died because Marcus had been 30 feet away instead of 3 feet away. The investigation cleared Marcus of any criminal wrongdoing, but the Chen family blamed him, the company fired him, and the security industry blacklisted him. More importantly, Marcus blamed himself. The guilt wasn't just professional, it was personal. David Chen had been a good man, a father of 2 young children, a husband who coached Little League on weekends. He'd been the kind of client who remembered his security team's birthdays and asked about their families. His death hadn't just been a professional failure for Marcus. It had been the loss of someone he genuinely respected. Thursday, October 21st, started like any other night. Marcus was working his usual route when he received a pickup request from the upscale Riverside district, an area he rarely serviced but couldn't afford to turn down. The address was for a young man who needed to get to the airport quickly. When Marcus pulled up to the address, a young man in his early 20s hurried out of an apartment building carrying a single suitcase and looking nervous. As he climbed into the back seat, Marcus caught sight of his face in the rearview mirror and felt his heart stop. The passenger looked exactly like David Chen had looked as a young man. The same facial structure, the same serious eyes, the same way of carrying himself. But it was more than physical resemblance. The young man had the same calm confidence that David had possessed. "Airport, please," the passenger said. "United Terminal. I need to catch the 11:30 flight." Marcus's hands were shaking as he pulled away from the curb. After 6 years of carrying David Chen's death in his heart, he was now driving David Chen's son. A son who probably hated Marcus more than anyone else in the world. As they drove through the Chicago streets, Marcus found himself stealing glances at his passenger in the rearview mirror. The resemblance was unmistakable, but Marcus needed to be sure. Finally, he couldn't stand the uncertainty.
"Excuse me,"
Marcus said quietly, "but are you Michael Chen?" The young man looked up, surprised. "Yes. How did you—" Then his expression changed as he really looked at Marcus for the first time. "Wait, you're Marcus Johnson. You were my father's security chief." The words hung in the air between them like a physical presence. Marcus felt his chest tighten with the familiar weight of guilt and shame. "Yes," he said simply. "I was." Michael was quiet for a long moment, studying Marcus's reflection in the mirror. "You're driving taxi now?" "Yes." "Because of what happened to my dad?" Marcus's voice was barely audible. "Yes." They drove in silence for several minutes before Michael spoke again. "My mom said you tried to visit us after the funeral, that you tried to apologize." "I did. She told me to stay away. I understood why." Michael leaned forward in his seat. "She was angry. We all were. But that was 6 years ago, Mr. Johnson. I've been thinking about you lately, wondering what happened to you." Marcus was surprised by the lack of hatred in Michael's voice. He'd expected anger, accusations, blame, all the things he'd been carrying himself for 6 years. Instead, there was something else. Sadness, maybe even curiosity. "I'm flying to Portland tonight," Michael continued, "because someone's been threatening my mom and sister, same kind of threats my dad got before he died. The police say they're probably not serious, but—" Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. "What kind of threats?" "Pictures of mom at the grocery store, my sister at school, messages saying the Chen family still owes a debt. The police think it's just harassment, but I'm not taking any chances. I'm moving Mom and Lisa out of Chicago until this gets sorted out." Marcus's mind was racing. David Chen had been killed because of a business dispute with a construction company that had been using mob connections to intimidate clients. The case had never been fully resolved. The shooter had been caught and convicted, but the people who'd ordered the hit had never been identified. "Michael," Marcus said carefully, "those threats aren't harassment. If they're targeting your family the same way they targeted your father, then you're all in real danger." "What do you mean?" Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He pulled the taxi over to the side of the road and turned to face Michael directly. "Your father's murder wasn't random. It was organized, planned, and the people responsible were never caught. If they're contacting your family now, it means they have unfinished business." Michael's face had gone pale. "How do you know this?" "Because I spent 2 years after your father's death investigating on my own time. I couldn't let it go. I couldn't live with having failed him and not at least trying to find out who was really responsible." Marcus reached into his glove compartment and pulled out a file folder, not the newspaper clipping, but something thicker. "I never stopped investigating your father's case. I couldn't. The guilt was eating me alive. but I thought maybe if I could find the people who really killed him, it would mean something. Michael opened the folder and found dozens of documents, police reports Marcus had obtained through contacts, photographs of suspects, financial records connecting David Chen's business rivals to organized crime figures. It was the work of someone who'd spent years building a case. "You did all this?" Michael asked in amazement. "I had to. I failed your father when it mattered, but I couldn't fail him completely. These threats to your family, they're connected to the Riverside construction case your father was working on when he died. The company was using intimidation to force clients into unfavorable contracts, and your father had evidence that could have sent several people to prison." Marcus started the taxi again, but instead of heading toward the airport, he took a different route. "The threats to your family aren't about old business, they're about new business. Riverside Construction is trying to develop the property where your father's office building stands, and your mother still owns the mineral rights to that land. They need her to sign over those rights, and they're using the same tactics they used 6 years ago." Michael was staring at the documents. "Why didn't you take this to the police?" "I tried, but I'm a disgraced ex-security guard driving taxi, and they're connected businessmen with expensive lawyers. Nobody would listen to me. But they might listen to you." Marcus drove to the police station instead of the airport. "Your flight to Portland leaves in 3 hours, he told Michael. "But if you get on that plane without addressing this, they'll just follow your family there. The only way to stop this is to finish what your father started." At the police station, Michael used his father's reputation and his own college connections to get them in front of Detective Sarah Martinez, who had worked the original case. When Marcus presented his 6 years of investigation work, and Michael explained the current threats, Detective Martinez finally had enough evidence to reopen the case with federal involvement. The next 4 hours were a whirlwind of statements, evidence review, and coordinated arrests. By dawn, 7 people connected to Riverside Construction were in custody, including the man who had ordered David Chen's murder 6 years earlier. Marcus drove Michael home as the sun came up over Chicago. "Your mother and sister are safe now," he said. "You don't need to move them." Michael was quiet for a long time before he spoke. "6 years ago, I hated you. I thought you'd failed my dad, that you were just another hired gun who didn't care about the people you were supposed to protect." Marcus winced. "I did fail him." "No," Michael said firmly. "You made a mistake. There's a difference. What you've done since then, 6 years of investigation, 6 years of carrying this guilt, 6 years of trying to make it right, that's not failure. That's dedication." 6 months later, Marcus Johnson sits in his new office at Chen Security Solutions, a company founded by Michael Chen in honor of his father. The business specializes in corporate security with a focus on protecting families and small businesses from organized crime intimidation. On Marcus's desk, next to the old newspaper clipping about David Chen's death, sits a new photo. Marcus and Michael at the courthouse after the successful prosecution of David Chen's killers. In the photo, both men are smiling with the relief that comes from finally seeing justice done. Marcus still drives sometimes, not taxi but as part of his security work, transporting clients who need protection. The other employees at Chen Security know him as the man who spent 6 years solving their founder's father's murder and who turned his greatest failure into his greatest achievement. Michael stops by Marcus's office every day after work, continuing a conversation they started that night in the taxi. "You know," Michael said recently, "my dad would have been proud of you. Not for being perfect, but for never giving up." Marcus smiles now, something he didn't do for 6 years. He has learned that redemption isn't about erasing mistakes, it's about what you do with the guilt and determination that follow. And sometimes, the person who drives you to the airport is actually driving you toward the closure you never knew you needed. Like this story? Hit the like button and subscribe for more inspiring tales of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Who is the most underestimated person in your workplace?